Before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that we have live transcription available, which you can turn on at the bottom of your screen by selecting Show Captions. And we also have two ASL interpreters here today, Kat Womack and Nikki Cherry. Good afternoon. My name is Madeline Delfa, and I'm the Assistant Director, Programs and Community Engagement at the Rose Art Museum. The Rose is honored to partner with the Staff Faculty Accessibility at Brandeis Group to launch the inaugural program in celebration of Disability, Inclusion, and Equity Month at Brandeis and highlight disability as creativity. I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Gannit Ankori, Henry and Lois Foster Director and Chief Curator of the Rose Museum and Professor of Fine Arts and Women's and Gender and Sexuality Studies at Brandeis. Dr. Ankori has published, lectured, and taught extensively about modern and contemporary art from a global perspective, with emphasis on issues pertaining to gender, identity, religion, trauma, exile, hybridity, disability, and their manifestations in the creative arts. Gannit is internationally renowned for her groundbreaking scholarship on Frida Kahlo. Her books include Frida Kahlo in San Francisco, Frida Kahlo Critical Lies, Frida Kahlo Art Life Diary, and Imaging Herself, Frida Kahlo's Poetics of Identity and Fragmentation. Gannit has also co-curated major Kahlo exhibition shows with Circe and Astrosa in London, Paris, New York, San Francisco, and the Netherlands. She organized the current display of Frida Kahlo self-portraits at the Rose Art Museum and, in 2021, the acclaimed Rose exhibition Frida Kahlo Pose. Please join me in welcoming Gannit Ankori.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just share my screen and begin. So thank you, Maddie, for that lovely introduction. Thanks to Nikki and Kat, our ASL interpreters, for joining us today. And thank all of you for being here. It is an absolute honor to help launch the Brandeis Disability Group. But before we begin, I wish to remember one of the pioneering activists for disability rights and inclusion, Judy Heumann, who passed away on March 4th. May she rest in power as we commit to continuing her bold and path-breaking work. So I'm thrilled to be here to share some thoughts and images related to Frida Kahlo's physical disabilities and her exceptional creative abilities as a bold artist who transformed trauma and loss into inspiring and path-breaking art. I'd like to begin by sharing the exhilarating aha moment of discovery that helped me title today's lecture, Phantom Limbs. The coral bead necklace, you see it on the screen, which Kahlo strung herself probably in the late 30s or early 40s, had been, to the best of my knowledge, unknown to Kahlo scholars. It does not appear in any of Kahlo's paintings, nor in photographs of the artist. I recently noticed it a few years ago when we enlarged a video or a film by Nicholas Murray from 1941, which shows Frida Kahlo and her husband Diego Rivera in the patio of the Blue House in Coyoacan, where they lived. And as you can see from this video capture, underneath this coral necklace, she is wearing the necklace that I showed. So when I saw the actual necklace, it was in London, I looked at it really, really closely and noticed something that, as I said, it was that eureka moment. The long metal items that separate the coral beads are actually metal limb-shaped milagros. The more visible milagros in the front are shaped like legs, and the top three on either side are in the shape of arms. Now, milagros, the word literally means miracles, are votive objects usually shaped like a body part, organ, or limb that is ailing or requires healing. Ubiquitous in Mexico, many such folk charms are made of tin or other metals like the ones that Kahlo used in lieu of beads. I had known that Kahlo meticulously fashioned every aspect of her dresses, her hairdos, her accessories to signify and construct her various identities and to make meaning. But for me, this necklace was a new and stunning example of how Kahlo chose to adorn herself with an image related to popular Mexican culture, identifying herself with an image related to popular Mexican culture, identifying with her native land. And, you know, she did this with wearing Tijuana costumes, wearing her hair in certain ways. And here we see that not only is this part of the Mexican tradition, it's also her way of wearing injured legs around her neck, deliberately displaying a visual representation of her own disabilities and losses. With your permission, I'd like to link the necklace to the discursive framework of my talk. I suggest thinking about the necklace as a deliberate visualization of Kahlo's phantom limbs. A phantom limb is a medical term used to describe a sensation of the presence of an absent, amputated limb. By extension, I will use the term today to allude to Kahlo's recurring visualizations of her traumatic losses. I hope to show how phantom limbs permeate Kahlo's oeuvre and that they often appear as displaced, embodied memories of psychophysical loss. Kahlo's necklace and other visual images alluding to her dismembered and remembered body parts are intentionally exhibited by the artist. And to reinforce this point, the point of Kahlo's agency, I'd like to quote the brilliant scholar Mike Ball, who wrote, quote, "If we know Frida Kahlo's face so well, it is because the artist chose to show it to us," end of quote. I'd like to expand Ball's argument and say that the same goes for Kahlo's body, with particular focus on what she considered the sites of her, and I quote her words, not mine, sites of her brokenness. As we see in Tree of Hope, she chooses to show herself as a beautiful Tijuana, covering up her disabled body, and at the same time chooses to uncover her ailing body, the wounds in her back, and even the corset, the therapeutic corset that was meant to help her heal. So thinking about visuality and disability is incredibly important and one of the main foci of my scholarship on Kahlo. Able-bodied spectators often regard physical disabilities with curiosity or worse, and stare in probing ways that may be demeaning or even dehumanizing. Alternatively, they may look away and disregard people with disabilities, rendering them invisible. The curatorial projects that I have been involved in with Circe and Estosa deliberately follow Frida Kahlo's lead and amplify her agency. Our exhibitions and this lecture show what the artist herself chose to display. Kahlo's significant sartorial identity and fashion persona, as well as her vulnerabilities, medically challenged body, and the apparatuses that try to restore her to health. In my talk today, I will focus on 3 sites of impairment: Kahlo's maimed leg, her broken spinal column, and her injured reproductive capacities. Kahlo chose to overtly and implicitly visualize these sites of loss time after time after time after time. This type of obsessive repetition is a characteristic response to trauma. Trauma, deriving etymologically from the Greek word for wound, by definition cannot be relegated to the past and is constantly present both temporally and psychologically. Hence, Kahlo's traumas, literally her unhealing wounds, appear and reappear throughout her life in various modes of expression. I'll reference and illustrate this point throughout my talk today. So let's start at the beginning, Kahlo's formative years. She knew how to strike a pose for her photographers from a very early age and did so throughout her life. Her first photographer, of course, was her beloved father, Wilhelm Guillermo Kahlo. So the daughter of a photographer posing for pictures is what she knew how to do. So looking at her photos at the age of 4, you see on the left, we see her playing with a doll or smiling ever sweetly. Look at that smile. Just a few years later, in 1919, she sports what will become her iconic, penetrating, and unsmiling gaze. And by 1929, she turns her face to the side, and sadness is etched upon her features. Kahlo began to compose a preparatory sketch tracing this trajectory from a smiling toddler to a somber young woman. Tellingly, she was never able to complete this drawing or to even begin the planned painting. Perhaps this is because the gaps between the 3 portraits mark the traumatic ruptures that interrupted the trajectory of Kahlo's life. These moments of loss will later be visualized in Kahlo's creative oeuvre as in symbolic, fragmented, or implicit modes of expression. What happened when Kahlo turned 6 was the first of several traumas. She contracted polio. In pain, bedridden, she became immobile for 9 months. A lost painting that I'm showing here offers nails as symbols of pain, straw wings and a grounded toy plane as metaphors for frustrated flight or the inability to move. The little Tehuana, Frida, tied up and literally unable to move, and we see that she hides her limbs, but they're literally disabled. Another painting titled She Plays Alone, or an alternative title is Little Girl with Death Mask, alludes to the fact that in 1913, polio was a life-threatening illness, as well as to the psychological pain that Kahlo endured. In both works, Kahlo used Mexican attributes, the child's Tijuana costume, the petate wings, and popular folk masks from papier-mâché to declare her ethnic affiliation with Mexico. Yet she uses these very symbols of indigeneity to point to her painful psychophysical predicament. In both works, she alludes to the debilitating effects of her illness rather than showing them directly. This and other distancing mechanisms relate to the unbearable weight of trauma, which renders direct confrontation sometimes impossible. Now, existent documents and testimonies reveal that Kahlo felt ashamed of what she called her paw. That's how she called her polio afflicted leg. And in the beginning, she internalized the body shaming she endured from a cruel ableist society. We have a lot of letters and a lot of testimonies from the artist herself. She tried initially to hide what she termed, quote unquote, a deformity, her word, not mine, by wearing several pairs of socks. And she took up an exercise regimen that intended to help her overcome or at least camouflage her limp. She was ridiculed, body shamed, and called Frida Pegleg, Frida Pata de Palo. And in both the paintings, this one and this one, we see that she presents the two little girls, her child self or alter ego, as disabled, disappointed, very much alone in a vast and empty terrain. Kahlo's horrific automobile accident crushed her maimed polio-stricken leg and caused it to deteriorate over the years. Eventually, her leg was amputated. Additionally, as many of you know, her spinal column was broken in several places, and a metal rod pierced her body, injuring her reproductive organs as it exited through her vagina. I lost my virginity was her dark, humorous quip about this. Humor, by the way, another coping mechanism. So Kahlo's biographer, Hayden Herrera, claims that the artist was never able to paint the accident. But I want to say that there are at least 3 images in which Kahlo visually retells the narrative of her accident. And additionally, as we shall see shortly throughout this talk, there are multiple paintings, drawings, and diary entries that visualize the accident indirectly, specifically visualizing her phantom limbs. A year after the accident, Kahlo made a drawing that illustrates the accident. You see it before you. The crashing vehicles and the site in the background. But in the foreground is what's really interesting. Kahlo sketches her response to the trauma. She shows herself splitting into a head, a large looming head, and a body, visualizing a psychological coping mechanism often experienced by trauma victims called splitting or disassociation. So the thinking self, Kahlo's oversized head, is separated from the injured, bandaged body self. Kahlo attempts to illustrate the survival mechanism that helped her overcome this near-fatal accident. It is interesting to compare this drawing with a photograph of Frida Kahlo taken by her father at the very same time. And here, you know, while she was drawing herself in the accident, she also posed covering her body with a man's 3-piece suit. Here are 2 photographs from the same photo shoot. On the left is a detail where you have a walking stick. So she really needed to use that stick after the accident, but she treats it like an accessory and poses like a dandy. We see that in life, she simultaneously hides and reveals her disability, but also deflects attention away from this aspect of her identity by highlighting her queer identity, which stands out within the conventional family photo. So rather than be body shamed as different, she chooses to stand out as special. And she continues to do this throughout her life, choosing to reveal and conceal and perform her own identity and use a lot of not just her art, but also fashion to do so. In a 1929 photograph, so some 4 years after the accident, Kahlo, this was recently found in the Frida Kahlo Museum, which is in La Casa Azul in Coyoacán, her childhood home. This photograph was found and was published under the descriptive title, Some Typical Mexican Toys. which these things are. So obviously Mexican folk tradition is something that Kahlo was interested in and with which she connected and was part of her identity. But if you look carefully at the composition, this photograph also, in my opinion, obliquely reenacts an accident with a horse and carriage running over a doll. And a similar doll was found as well. You see, Kahlo made many dolls that were kind of also her alter egos, and you see the connected eyebrows. This was just in the Paris exhibition that we curated that came down last weekend. So rather than just a random ensemble of typical Mexican toys, we see her referencing her accident. As late as 1943, Kahlo repainted a traditional Mexican retablo, that's a votive painting that were very, very popular in Mexico, to give thanks to the Madonna or to a deity for someone being saved from an accident. Here, Kahlo repainted, reconfigured, and modified the original retablo to tell or retell the story of her own accident. In the revised text, she imagines her parents, Guillermo Kahlo and Matilda Calderon, thanking the Madonna of Sorrows for the miraculous survival of their daughter, Frida, in 1925. You see that Kahlo painted herself wearing a blue and white schoolgirl uniform, which appears in some other paintings. See the detail on the left. Her right leg is absent from view, being crushed by the trolley, rendered disabled. Her right hand is also not seen, suggesting her helplessness. And I want to just say that in many of her works, we see her painting herself with her hands covered or absent, implying a kind of helplessness. But what we see here in this work that is that the ship-shaped shoe and this strange leg is kind of symbolic of polio, and this penetrating rod may allude to her accident. We see her leaving the childhood and the schoolgirl uniform and choosing the Tijuana costume that is both covers up her disabilities, allows her to have the therapeutic corsets underneath the generous huipil, but also is a way of declaring her affinity and alignment with Mexico, and specifically a region of Tijuana, a region in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, where that is supposed to be a matriarchal culture. So after the accident, Kahlo's instinct, let me go back to this. Kahlo's instinct was to hide her wounds and what she called her, quote, broken body, just as she has done as a polio-stricken child who was body shamed and taunted as Frida Pegleg. But eventually, as we see here, she chose the Tijuana costumes that both asserted her Mexicanidad and hid the disabilities that she wanted to hide. And during the first years of her marriage to Diego Rivera, she carefully constructed her persona as a colorful and flamboyant Mexicana, a paradigmatic Mexican woman, hiding her disabilities, emphasizing her native identity with the help of her self-fashioning. This self-image appears in photographs long before it appears complete in her paintings. And we see it here when she moved to San Francisco with her husband, Diego Rivera, almost a newlywed. She brought clothes with her and was photographed by the incredible photographers of the day. After this, or concurrently with this, she painted herself as a Tijuana woman in this 1931 double portrait presenting her husband, Diego Rivera. He is the great painter. He holds on to the attributes of the painter, the palette and the brushes. And she holds on to her rebozo, that is her costumes, her self-fashioned attribute. And she also holds on to her husband as the Mexican wife. She not only hides her disability under the beautiful costumes, she celebrates her otherness, her Mexican alterity within the US context. So just as in before in 1926, she was highlighting and shedding light on her queer identity, not on her disabled identity. Here she's deflecting attention away from being different because of disabilities, and she creates her specialness through her ethnic identity. So while she was showing herself in this way, and there was a lot of emphasis on her look and her style and her fashion, both she and everyone else downplayed her identity as a significant painter in her own right. This is an example of a title: Wife of the Master Mural Painter gleefully dabbles in works of art. This has to be one of my least favorite headlines by far. And all the other newspaper clippings of the day display what scholar Moya Bailey terms misogynoir. I'm using a bias against Black women. I here use it against a brown woman. She was often seen as little Frida, brown, and other very disturbing things. But this is a topic for another lecture. So Kahlo's art and her self-perception as an artist changed drastically following her third trauma. On July 4th, 1932, in Detroit, Michigan, where her husband was commissioned to paint murals at the Detroit Institute, Kahlo nearly bled to death while suffering a miscarriage. It may be linked to wounds that she suggests she sustained during the accident. It may also be the result of Kahlo's attempt to abort the fetus a few weeks earlier. So she tried to abort. When the abortion failed, she thought maybe she could have the baby. And then on July 4th, she had a miscarriage and nearly bled to death. This painting is known as Henry Ford Hospital, but was titled by the artist when she showed the work in New York and in Paris. It was called The Lost Desire. Here she visualizes the unborn, absent, I would call it phantom fetus. She also exposes taboo vaginal blood, pubic hair, what she termed her broken body, all twisted. She previously hid it from view. Here she exposes the twisted, bleeding, imperfect, by normative standards, female body. She shows her inability to bring a child into this world. So deliberately kind of an anti-nativity scene or subversion of the reclining nude. She's showing things that had previously been deemed unworthy of representation. She also attempts to visually display the dysfunctional aspects of her body. She paints a sterilized autoclave, a snail that looks like a uterus from one of her medical books, a broken pelvis that she also copied from a medical book. So all of these objects actually stand in for her organs and that were that and her disabilities. So in August, so just 1 month after she almost died, Kahlo made her first and only lithograph. In it, she exposes her body, boldly making visible the sites of her disabilities. Her darkened, ailing leg, first the polio, then the accident. Her spine, which was broken in many places, and she just shows that she's asymmetrical and it's splitting her in half. The unborn fetus, both the one that she tried to abort and the one that she miscarried. But one of the most dramatic and significant things is that she grows a third arm and takes possession of the palette, the same palette that had previously belonged only to Rivera. So the growing of a third arm in the context of disability studies, I would argue, suggests that Kahlo asserts her agency to imagine and make up a new enabled body part. She visualizes alternative abilities and paints her re-enabled body. Indeed, I would argue that the third hand that yields the palette indicates that art becomes Kahlo's special ability, allowing her to construct a new, empowered, and alternatively abled self. I also want to note that the palette is shaped similarly to the embryo in utero, perhaps indicating that Kahlo's art compensated for the lost child. She herself had said that she painted what she had lost or could not have. I'd also like to stress that pain in general and trauma in particular are experiences that sometimes defy verbal articulation. And this amplifies Kahlo's own statement explaining that she painted, and I quote, "what I could not say in words and could not express in any other way," end of quote. Hence the profound importance of Kahlo's work, providing a visual language that can express the unsayable experiences of trauma and the ignored or overlooked experiences of living with a disabled body. So Kahlo's ability and her disability are clearly presented in two drawings that Sis and I paired in a lot of our recent exhibitions. In the drawing on the left, Kahlo self-consciously poses and composes herself. Her multiple hands may be viewed as heightened capacities, enhanced dexterity, producing compensatory hyper abilities. But the second drawing, "Appearance Can Be Deceiving," is the title that she gives it. It exposes Kahlo's sites of disability, the thinner leg, the broken column, the stifling corset underneath that tries to heal her, a reference to the reproductive organs. But she also shows how she covers it up with the Tijuana costume. So she shows us both how she performs her identities and how she, what is underneath. So Kahlo's fetus also appears on her corset. This is a plaster corset that she painted, both her communist affiliation and the child she could never have. And as you see here, she chooses to lift her huipil, her tunic, and expose it and show it. So she decides what to show. The corset, by definition, points to her her disability and her need for a therapeutic corset, but then she also points to her other losses. Moreover, the diary that she kept in the last 10 years of her life, from 44 to 54, a phantom fetus appears over and over again. And this is in the 50s, even though, you know, the miscarriage happened in 1932. So we seem, you know, she can't, these traumas are never forgotten. Even if they're repressed, they find a way to express themselves. So now I'm going to look at this work a little bit more closely. This is a politically charged, complex, layered painting titled Self-Portrait on the Borderline Between the US and Mexico. Frida Kahlo painted it in Detroit shortly after the miscarriage. And people have noted that she juxtaposes the United States with the industrial North with Mexico and its archaeology. I want to show, to just focus on the disability aspect. We see that she hides her body and covers up any sign of bodily impairment under a pink dress. That's kind of unusual for her. She further disguises herself by espousing the name Carmen Rivera here on the pedestal, which is a name that that Diego Rivera sometimes called her, but was not her part of her real identity. So she's hiding something. She addresses her wounds indirectly, as if she cannot confront them. Identifying with her native Mexico, she holds the Mexican flag in her hand and presents archaeological ruins that contrast her native land with, as I said, with the industrialized US. The pre-Hispanic references on the left side of the composition clearly symbolize the cycles of life and death, life through the flowers and fertility, the roots, and demise, if you look at the crumbling pyramid and the skull, thinking directly about death. But close scrutiny of Kahlo's choices exposes additional, more nuanced layers of meaning. So she didn't just use pre-Hispanic artifacts, she used very specific ones. So she based her imagery on clay figurines from Colima and Nayarit in Western Mexico. Now she faithfully copies a fertility figure who possesses a pronounced vagina, stub legs, and thin, ineffectual arms. These attributes probably resonated with Kahlo's personal experiences and distorted body image just after the miscarriage. But it is the brown clay figurine from Western Mexico that is most telling in this context. Its face seems rather androgynous, but the breasts indicate that it is a female figure. Moreover, a closer look reveals that this figure was originally a breastfeeding an infant whose head is broken off. Now, please note that the broken headless infant is in the original sculpture. So Kahlo, in choosing which works to to choose, she did it because it resonated with her. So when we compare the original figure to Kahlo's rendition of it, we discover that she deliberately broke the figure's foot, projecting her own disability onto this Mexican alter ego. So you see, this broken foot is not in the original. In 1938, Kahlo was still dealing with her losses. In Four Inhabitants of Mexico, Kahlo appears as a small child. Her alter egos are four Mexican objects from a variety of indigenous arts and crafts traditions. As she does with her sartorial choices, here too, Kahlo embraces a hybrid and complex Mexicanidad. So not only Aztec, not only she thinks of the hybridity of Mexican culture, and she also wears the hybridity of Mexican culture. She projects her own disabilities onto the objects, distancing herself from her own pain. So she copied Nayarit sculpture of a pregnant woman. And this one is still in the Kahlo Rivera collection. We also see it in the background of photographs of Kahlo from this period. And it is now on display in San Angel in the Museum Anahuacalli. The pregnant woman in Kahlo's rendition is broken. So she's both pregnant, alluding, and she's hollow. Kahlo writes that about her, but she also breaks her feet, and alluding to these phantom limbs, to Kahlo's own disability. And perhaps nowhere is the repeated presence of absent phantom limbs more obvious than in Kahlo's monumental 1940 painting, The Wounded Table. This painting has been lost and is only known from two photographs, and this is the only color image of the work, hence it's kind of blurry. What we see here is that on her 33rd birthday, Kahlo positions herself as a Christ-like figure attending the Last Supper. She wears her eponymous Tijuana costume, identifying as a Mexican woman. The figures that accompany her are, as she performs her identities on what seems to be a stage, are her niece and nephew, here, Isolda and Antonio Pinedo Kahlo, a Judas figure, and a skeletal calavera from Rivera's collection, and her pet deer, Granizo. Here's one of my favorite photographs of the pet deer. The Judas and calavera symbolize betrayal and death, and they seem to separate Kahlo from her family and her pet, which was also, her pets were kind of surrogate family as well. But this overt drama merely hides what is really going on beneath the surface, or literally under the table. And please look carefully. I'd like to point to the gruesome flayed limbs of the table, the bleeding feet of both the Judas and the calavera. So once again, Kahlo displaces and projects her wounds onto inanimate objects, and they, her disabilities make, her disabilities make unexpected appearances elsewhere, but she always has her own way of expressing and visualizing it. Another figure sits next to Kahlo. We see her here. And it's very interesting because Kahlo is physically attached to this figure who becomes part of her body and part of herself. This Nayarit clay sculpture of a seated couple is from the collection of the Blue House, the Museo Frida Kahlo. And I photographed it several years ago, and it's still there. In the original statue, it was a nurturing female ritualistically feeding a male. So relevant to the Last Supper in a way. Last Supper, a Christian narrative. This kind of ritualistic feeding would be a pre-Hispanic ritual, and Kahlo using both. But the figures have stub legs, and often the art of Western Mexico has figures with these stub legs. And in her painting, Kahlo's right hand seems to wither away and transfigures into inanimate clay. So her identification with this pre-Hispanic artifact both asserts her espousal of Mexican identity, but also renders her visually and disturbingly handicapped. Kahlo's life experience of exacerbated medical issues may also be painfully observed in her personal objects, like this pair of mismatched shoes, and there are many of them in La Casa Azul. And in the final years of her life, first her toes and then her right leg was amputated. But here too, we see that the story is that she was given a prosthetic leg that was brown and ugly, but she decided she wanted a red boot with bells, and she also inserted Chinese embroidery on it to make it beautiful. So even the disabilities become and the apparatuses that helped her redesign her body became works of art, became a site of beauty and creativity. So phantom limbs also appear in Kahlo's diary with obsessive frequency, no longer visualized vicariously through inanimate objects and pre-Hispanic sculpture. Here she lets loose in a way that she did not in daily life or in her finished paintings. Kahlo's last self-portrait on the right, sketched in her diary shortly before her death, after her leg was amputated. We see arrows of pain puncturing her body, like alluding to Saint Sebastian. Her body image shows her regressing to childhood, displaying herself as Frida Pata de Palo, or peg leg. She's kind of thinking of the image relates to the disabled child she used to be. And while preparing for the amputation, which she said would kill her, she imagines herself without a head, with a broken column, and with a bandaged, footless leg. She is handless, helpless, and the wings she sprouts from her shoulders are totally useless, like those of the child self who was struck by polio. So trauma, as many of you may know, is often layered with later experiences triggering earlier iterations of loss. At the end of her life, Kahlo re-experiences and remembers her peg leg identity. The broken column, which caused much pain, suffering, and hardship, is another site of disability that Kahlo visualized here very directly. Because we are running out of time, I'm just going to say that here you see both the actual corset, two corsets, one that she actually transforms into a work of art, and then a work of art that uses in which she paints the corset. So she begins to use the disabilities, both her body and the corsets, to create art, to expand her creativity. So I want to share one final example. This is from 1945. There are many, many more, but our time is coming to a close. Kahlo painted a self-portrait with her pets and a clay figurine from her collection. We see that stoic pain seems etched on her facial features, but the pain is also symbolized in the piercing nail scene in the background. The nails also allude to Christ's martyrdom. She often uses it in that way. The ribbon, Kahlo said, and I quote, is symbolic of family relations, and it links her with her Itzcuintli dog, a spider monkey, and the pre-Hispanic figures. These are all natives of Mexico and her surrogate children, companions, but also alter egos. And I want to talk about the Nayarit figure. It's not merely symbolic of Kahlo's Mexican identity. It is a specific figure from the Rivera Kahlo collection of a hunchback with a maimed right foot. And here's some here's the detail. Now, in many pre-Hispanic traditions, hunchbacks were considered spiritual and were highly venerated. They were not regarded as disabled at all. Rather, society viewed them as possessing special abilities and abnormal powers. By showing the hunchback and choosing to show the hunchback as her alter ego, Kahlo may be visualizing her bodily impairments not as disabilities, but as alternative abilities and empowerment. In conclusion, from age 6 until her death at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo endured grave injuries that impacted her leg, her spine, her reproductive organs, and her emotional well-being. In confronting her physical disabilities, Kahlo oscillated between hiding and exposing what she herself called her quote-unquote broken body. When she did display her sites of bodily impairment, and she did this throughout her life, she chose various modes of representation, from overt to covert, from narrative to symbolic. From the outside, and when we read through Kahlo's medical records, she may be regarded as severely disabled. From a different perspective, I would argue, Kahlo was anything but. She was a visionary with extraordinary capacities and incredible abilities. Art, unbounded imagination, and radical creativity were her superpowers. Through her creative superpowers, Kahlo invented a visual vocabulary with which she expressed that which cannot be said in words. Her innovative art has the ability to embody absence, make phantom limbs materialize, and potently articulate the physical and emotional impact of trauma and loss. Thank you.
Do we want to open up the chat for some questions?
All right, I'm going to turn on the chat for everyone. If you would like to ask Gannit a question about anything that she's discussed, please feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll kind of just go through one by one.
I see Marilyn Hayes thanked us for the presentation. Thank you for joining us. I know that midday on a Wednesday is not always free time. Okay, thank you, Jessica.
Okay, so I'm seeing a question about the repeated depiction of a heart in Kahlo's work.
Okay.
And then we also have a question about, do you know how many
the next?
necklace?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the necklace. Frida Kahlo herself strung the necklace. So we know that. And she actually sourced beads from different places and made a lot of her own jewelry. The bead, she did a lot of beading. In fact, when we were when these materials were first seen in 2004, they were found in some closed cabinets and rooms in her home. We found that on some of the beads, we had paint, because she was like trying to match the color of the paint to those things. So she made the necklace. The heart, of course, relates to Catholic imagery, but also to pre-Hispanic images. So Kahlo uses it as many times as like her broken heart. Sometimes she has a heart on her palette, saying she's painting with her heart. So it's used as a multi-layered symbol and also alluding to other things.
We have another question asking.
The sexual identity.
Oh, you got it.
I actually can see that, the sexual identity. Well, that's a really, really important question. And it's one of the questions that it's one of the issues that we really emphasized during our in Frida Kahlo Pose here at the exhibition here. So Frida Kahlo was, using today's terminology to define her feels a little strange. Clearly, she had a queer identity. One of her famous quotes is, "I have the mustache and in general the face of the opposite sex." And as we saw in the photograph that you actually see right here in my background, she cross-dressed from the age of 18, 19. She was a tomboy. And we know that she was bisexual, and that she did a lot of, and she emphasized what are considered masculine traits. So her sexuality was complex. She had lovers who were both men and women. And she herself dressed herself up both as femme and often as not, as kind of masculinizing herself or androgenizing herself.
We have some questions. One, just a point of clarification about whether it was her left leg or her right leg that was amputated.
So it was the polio, and the amputation and the deterioration was her right leg. Sometimes it appears as the mirror image. So if she was using a photograph, you see it as, that's why sometimes it's misleading, but it was her right leg. And yeah, it was her right leg. And we have a lot of drawings and writings where she talks about the pain and all of that.
Okay. I'm wondering if we might go to this question about the phantom arm holding the palette as a rare occurrence of celebrating the gifts of her pain.
So the phantom arm, and in general, the phantom arms that you saw in that drawing that I love, it's probably one of my favorite drawings, where you see her kind of posing, fixing her dress, changing her pose, and then in one hand drawing, or then sprouting another arm that holds the palette, and it's a healthy arm. I think that is what she did. I think she, the way that she was different as disabled, but then used her body to celebrate her otherness as a Mexican woman, as a beautiful woman, as a Tijuana woman, etc. So I think that she does transform pain into art and beauty and a celebration of these alternative abilities. I don't like the term disability. I use it only because it's the term that's used in the field now. But she was not disabled. She was alternatively abled, and in a magnificent way. Her birth name was Magdalena Frida Carmen Kahlo. Calderon was her mother's name. That's true.
I think we have time for one more question.
Well, I see a really interesting one about what do scholars, art historians think she would have used. So the thing is that Frida Kahlo wanted to be a doctor. She did not want to be an artist. She went to the National Preparatory School and she studied in what we would call today a pre-med track. The accident made it impossible for her to go back to school. And while she was very much alone in bed, she used a mirror and a fold-up kind of easel to paint herself and to paint portraits of friends. And then she slowly thought maybe she could make a living by painting portraits. And as you saw, she didn't even see herself in 1931 as a painter. Only when she came to the United States and in San Francisco, she started to paint a little bit more seriously. And only after 1932, I think she became the artist we know today, the taboo breaking innovative artist she was today. So she actually did not want to be a painter. I think if she had had the accident and started to paint, people think that she might paint portraits, she has beautiful still lives, but it wasn't either she has disabilities and paints or not. I mean, she wasn't even a painter. It was only after she was disabled that put her on the track to be an artist. Yasmin, can we save the, yeah.
Yes, we'll be saving this chat.
Can I just address, I see a really great question. So those of you who need to leave can leave. And those of you who want to stay, I'm going to answer a few more questions. I want to say that I did a whole study of her medical books, all the books in her library. And I found the sources for a lot of her work. So because she wanted to be a doctor, she felt really comfortable with medical images, and a lot of her work is impacted by medical illustrations, especially gynecological medical. She had a lot of books about birthing, etc. So we have that's absolutely correct, Leo. So I think that's what I see. Everything is moving very fast. Can we save the chat? So if there are questions, I can write to some people with answers. It was very difficult to squeeze every example that I showed. There are like 100 more that I could have shared with you and would have wanted to share with you. But please come to the Rose Art Museum to see the works that we still have on view. And I want to thank Yasmin Vera, our educational coordinator, and Madeline Delfa, our assistant director for programming, and our two wonderful ASL interpreters, Kat and Nikki. And especially thank all of you. And please note that Mel, our partner for the staff faculty accessibility, they just thanked me. Oh, you're very, very welcome. It's an honor to be here with you. Thank you, everyone.